Medieval India, page number 112. Northwest and North India, the Shariks, the Lodi Sultans, and Kashmir. As we have seen, the invasion of Timur, Sultan Mahmud Tughlaq, fled from Delhi and took shelter first in Gujarat and then in Malwa. By the time he decided to return, the prestige of the throne of Delhi had been shattered. In the neighborhood of Delhi itself, ambitious nobles and zamindars asserted their independence. As a wit said, the kingdom of the Lord of Universe extends from Delhi to Palam. Amongst the first to assert independence in the Ganga Valley was Malik Sarwar, a prominent noble of the time of Firoz Tughlaq. Malik Sarwar has been Wazir for some time and then had been nominated to the eastern areas with his title Malik us Sharak, Lord of the East. His successors came to be called as Shariks after his title. The Sharik Sultan fixed their capital at Jaunpur in eastern Uttar Pradesh, which they beautified with magnificent palaces, mosques, and mausoleums. Only a few of these mosques and mausoleums survive now. They show that Shariki sultans did not just copy the Delhi style of architecture, they created a magnificent style of their own, marked by lofty gates and huge arches. The Shariki sultans were great patrons of learning and culture. Poets and men of letters, scholars and saints assembled at Jaunpur and shed lustre on it. In course of time, Jaunpur came to be known as the Shiraz of the East. Malik Muhammad Jaisi, the author of the well-known Hindi work Padmavat, lived at Jaunpur. The Shariki Sultanate lasted for less than a century. At its height, it extended from Aligarh in western Uttar Pradesh to Darbhanga in North Bihar, and from the boundary of Nepal to the north of Bundelkhand in the south. The Shivaji rulers were eager to conquer Delhi, but they were not successful in doing so. With the establishment of the Lodis in Delhi towards the middle of the 15th century, the Shariki rulers were gradually put on defensive. They lost most of the areas in western Uttar Pradesh and exhausted themselves in a series of bitter but futile assaults on Delhi. At length, in 1484, Bahlul Lodi, the ruler of Delhi, occupied Jaunpur and annexed the Shariki kingdom. The Shariki king lived on as an exile at Chunar for some time and died from broken-hearted and repeated failures in regaining his kingdom. The Shariki rulers maintained law and order over a large tract following the collapse of government in Delhi. They successfully prevented the rulers of Bengal in extending their control over eastern Uttar Pradesh. Above all, they established a cultural tradition which continued after long the downfall of the Shariks. After the Timurid invasion, a new dynasty called the Sayyid dynasty arose in Delhi. A number of Afghan Sardars established themselves in Punjab. The most important of these were Bahlul Lodi, who had been granted the Ikta of Sarhind. Bahlul Lodi checked the growing power of the Khokars, a fierce warlike tribe which lived in the salt ranges. Soon they dominated the entire Punjab, called in to help the ruler of Delhi against an impending attack by the ruler of Malwa. Bahlul stayed on. Before long, his men took over the control of Delhi. Bahlul formally crowned himself 1451 when the ruler of Delhi died in exile. This ended the Sayyid dynasty. The Lodis dominated the upper Ganga Valley and Punjab from the middle of the 15th century. As distinct from the earlier Delhi rulers who were Turks, the Lodis were Afghans. Although the Afghans formed a large group in the army at the Delhi Sultanate, very few Afghan nobles had been accorded important positions. That is why Bakhtiyar Khalji had to seek his fortune in Bihar and Bengal. The growing importance of the Afghans in North India was shown by the rise of Afghan rule in Malwa. In the south, they held important positions in the Bahmani kingdom. Bahlul Lodi's energies were occupied mainly in his contest against the Shariki rulers. Finding himself in a weak position, Bahlul invited the Afghans of Ro to come to India so that they will get rid of the ignominy of the poverty and I shall gain ascendancy. The Afghan historian Abbas Sarwani adds, on receipt of these farmans, the Afghans of Ro came like locusts to join the service of Sultan Bahlul. This may be an exaggeration, but the incursion of the Afghans not only enabled Bahlul to defeat the Shariks, it changed the complexion of the Muslim society in India, making the Afghans a very numerous and important element in it, both in South and North India. The most important Lodi Sultan was Sikandar Lodi, 1489 to 1517, a contemporary of Mahmud Begara of Gujarat and Rana Sanga of Mewar. Sikandar Lodi geared the kingdom of Delhi for the coming struggle for power with the states. He tried to subdue the Afghan Sardars who had a sturdy sense of tribal independence and were not accustomed to look upon the Sultan as more the first among the equals. Sikandar made the nobles stand before him in order to impress them with his superior status. When a royal order was sent, all the nobles had to come out in the town. All the nobles had to come out of the town to receive it with due honor. All those who held Jagirs had to submit accounts regularly. Drastic punishments were given to those who embezzled money or were corrupt. Sikandar Lodi had only limited success in his efforts to control the nobles. At his death, Bahlul Lodi had divided the kingdom among his sons and relations. Though Sikandar had been also to undo this after a hard struggle, the idea of a partition of the empire among the sons of the ruler persisted among the Afghans. Sikandar Lodi was able to establish efficient administration in his kingdom. He laid great emphasis on justice, and all the highways of the empire were made safe from robbers and bandits. The prices of all essential commodities were remarkably cheap. The Sultan took keen interest in agriculture. He abolished the autoroi duty on grains and established a new measurement of yard called the Gas-e-Sikandari, which continued to prevail till the Mughal times. The rent rolls prepared in his time formed the basis of the rent rolls prepared in the time of Sher Shah later. Sikandar Lodi is regarded as an orthodox, even a bigoted king. He sternly forbade the Muslims from following practices which were against the Sharia, Islamic law, such as women visiting graves of saints or processions being taken out in their memory. He reimposed the jizya on Hindus and executed Brahmins for holding that the Hindu and Muslim scriptures were equally sacred. He also demolished a few well-known Hindu temples during the campaign, such as the temple at Nagar Kot. Sikandar Lodi gave magnificent grants to scholars, philosophers and men of letters so that cultured people of all climes and countries, including Arabia and Iran, flocked to his court. Due to the Sultan's efforts, a number of Sanskrit words were translated into Persian. He was also interested in music and had a number of rare Sanskrit works on music translated into Persian. During his time, a large number of Hindus took to learning Persian and were recruited to various administrative posts. Thus, the process of cultural rapprochement between Hindus and the Muslims continued apace during his reign. Sikandar Lodi also extended his dominions by conquering Dholpur and Gwalior. It was during these operations that, after careful survey and deliberations, Sikandar Lodi selected the site of Agra 1506. The town was meant for command the area of eastern Rajasthan and the route to Malwa and Gujarat. In course of time, Agra became a large town and second capital of the Lodis. The growing interest of Sikandar in eastern Rajasthan and Malwa was shown by his taking the Khan of Nagaur under his protection and by trying to make Ranthambore transfer its allegiance from Malwa to Delhi. His successor Ibrahim Lodi even led a campaign against Mewar, which he had been noted earlier, was repulsed. The growing power of the Rana in the Malwa and the extension of his power towards Agra and Bayana presaged a conflict between Mewar and the Lodis. It is difficult to say what the outcome of this conflict would have been if Babur had not intervened. An account of North India in the 15th century would be incomplete without mentioning the Kingdom of Kashmir. The beautiful valley of Kashmir was for long a forbidden land for all outsiders. According to Al-Biruni, entry into Kashmir was not allowed even to Hindus who were not known personally to the nobles there. During the period, Kashmir was known to be a center of Saivism. However, the situation changed with the ending of Hindu rule around the middle of the 14th century. The devastating attack on Kashmir in 1320 by the Mongol of leader Dalucha was prelude to it. It is said that Dalucha ordered the wholesale massacre of men while women and children were enslaved and sold to merchants in Central Asia. The towns and villages were ravaged and plundered and set on fire. The hapless Kashmir government could offer no opposition to these doings, thereby losing all public sympathy and support. 100 years after the Mongol invasion, Zainul Abidin, considered the greatest of the Muslim monarchs of Kashmir, ascended the throne. Kashmir society had profoundly changed during this period. There had been a continuous incursion of Muslim saints and refugees from Central Asia into Kashmir, the Baramulla route providing an easy access. Another development was the rise of series of remarkable Sufi saints called Rishis, who combined some features of Hinduism and Islam, partly by preaching of the saints and partly by force. The lower class population had converted to Islam. To complete the process, a vehement prosecution of the Brahmins began in the reign of Sikandar Shah 1389 to 1413. The Sultan ordered that all Brahmins and learned Hindus should become Muslims or leave the valley. Their temples were to be destroyed and the idols of gold and silver were to be melted down in order to be used for currency. It is said that these orders were issued at the instance of King's minister Suha Bhatt, who had converted to Islam and was bent on harassing his former co-religionists. The situation changed with the accession of Zainul Abidin 1420 to 70, who had all these orders cancelled. He conciliated and brought back to Kashmir all the non-Muslims who had fled. Those who wanted to revert to Hinduism or had pretended to be Muslims in order to save their lives were given freedom to do as they pleased. He even restored their libraries and grants which Hindus had enjoyed. The temples were also restored. More than 100 years later, Abu Fazl noted that Kashmir had 150 majestic temples. It is likely that most of them had been restored under Zainul Abidin. Zainul Abidin continued the policy of broad broad veneration to other spheres as well. He abolished the jizya and cow slaughter, and to respect the wishes of the Hindus, withdrew the ban on sati. The Hindu occupied many high offices in his government. Thus, Sriya Bhatt was Minister of Justice and Court Physician. His first two queens were Hindus, being the daughters of the Raja of Jammu. They were the mothers of all his four sons. He married a third wife after their death. The Sultan was himself a learned man and composed poetry. He was well versed in Persian, Kashmiri, Sanskrit, and Tibetan languages. He gave patronage to Sanskrit and Persian scholars at his instance. Many Sanskrit works such as Mahabharata and Kalhana's History of Kashmir, Raja Tauringi, were translated into Persian. And brought up to date. He was fond of music, and hearing of this, the Raja of Gwalior sent him two rare Sanskrit works on music. The Sultan also looked after the economic development of Kashmir. He sent two persons to Samarkand to learn the arts of paper making and bookbinding. He focused many crafts in Kashmir, such as stone cutting and polishing, bottle making, gold beating, etc. He also encouraged the art of shawl making, for which Kashmir is so famous. Market making and the art of manufacturing fireworks had also developed in Kashmir. The Sultan developed agriculture by making large number of dams, canals and bridges. He was an enthusiastic builder, his greatest engineering achievement being Zena Lanka, the artificial island in the Vular lake in which he built his palace and a mosque. Zainul Abidin is still called Badshah, the great Sultan, by Kashmiris. Though not a great warrior, he defected to Mongol invasion of Ladakh, conquered the Baltistan area called Tibet-e-Khurd, and kept control over Jammu, Rajouri, etc. He thus unified the Kashmiri kingdom. The fame of Zainul Abidin had spread far and wide. He was in touch with leading rulers in the other parts of India, as also the leading rulers of Asia. A quick survey of the developments during the 15th century show that the regional balance of power could give neither peace nor stability. The regional kingdoms had, however, many cultural contributions to their credit. In these kingdoms, local styles of architecture were developed, often using local traditions. Local languages were also patronized. Overall, in these kingdoms, the forces of liberalism and cultural integration remained active. Some of the rulers anticipating Akbar in the number of fields. Yes. Thank you everyone for tuning in. In the next part, we have successfully finished the chapter. In the next part, we'll start with the next chapter, that is chapter number 11, I believe. Yes, chapter number 11. That chapter is on cultural development in India from the 13th to 15th century. All the best for exams. Do share and subscribe the channel for more videos like this. And on the screen right now, you might see some playlist and the link to the previous video. Do watch them, and all the best. Thank you everyone.